So I want you guys to think of 3 characteristics of an effective teacher. What are 3 characteristics of an effective teacher? You can write this on your note-taking sheet or whatever you do have in front of you. We did that note-taking sheet was just an extra, organizer tool to help frame your thinking and also gather some important information, obviously, from our session today. So 3 characteristics of an effective teacher. If you want to brainstorm that, and I'll give you about 30 seconds. Okay, who would like to share one? Share a characteristic. Don't forget to unmute yourself.
I think a prominent one right now would be flexibility. We're used to being in the classroom. Now we're virtual, so.
Okay. Someone else?
Content knowledge.
Content knowledge.
Loving and caring.
Loving and caring. Let's do one more.
Engaging.
Engaging. Okay, so the things that I heard you say fall under the 3 characteristics of an effective teacher that Harry Wong talks about in his book. But and they are, so you would like to write these down: positive expectations, classroom management, and lesson mastery. Those are positive expectations, classroom management, and lesson mastery. So efficient and effective teachers know what they are doing and do things right consistently. So efficient is doing things right, and effective is doing things right consistently. So as we move forward throughout this year, our focus is going to be, our time together will be focused around these 3 characteristics of effective teachers: the classroom management, the expectations, and the lesson mastery. So our session today will focus on these 3 characteristics and how they look and sound in a virtual learning environment. So all of our work this year will focus around those 3 characteristics. So is Jenny, you ready?
Hang on. Yes. Am I unmuted?
You are
No.
unmuted.
Okay, good. I was worried. I couldn't figure out how to unmute myself if I wasn't. Okay, good. Yes, we're ready to go.
Yeah.
So a couple things. I am realizing this just a few moments ago. When we were at Newport Primary, you already saw some of this information. But again, I think it'll still, that's just a small group of you, but it'll be good for you to hear some of it again, I think. And then hopefully too, some of the things that you have had time to think about, you can add to our discussion as we go, okay? So our learning intention for the next hour and a half, okay, or hour and 20 minutes, is our goal right now is just to think about what is necessary for a positive and productive virtual learning environment, okay? So that's our goal. This is what we're going to think about for the next hour and 20 minutes. Our success criteria. So think about, especially if you were with Ju and I yesterday, we talked about this. So this is how you're going to know if you are able to really think about that positive and productive virtual learning environment. If you can, identify characteristics of an effective teacher, which we've already done. If you can, have a plan for your own personal well-being. Identify norms and expectations for both face-to-face and virtual environments. We also want you to think about how you're going to evaluate either, and the term here is website, but that doesn't mean you have to have a website. It's your learning management system. So whether that be your Google Classroom page, wherever it is, how do we evaluate that to know whether or not both students and families are able to access and use it in an easy way? And then that last one is, let's really think about and be very specific about ways that we can develop positive relationships and make connections to students, okay? And here's the deal. So in Microsoft Teams, I'm presenting. I can't see the chat, so Jewett's keeping track of that, and she'll chime in as things come up, but please feel free. If you have a question or a comment, you can drop it in the chat. You also feel free to unmute yourself and interrupt. If you don't know already, we are very flexible and very informal, so please feel free to add to the conversation at any time.
And Jenny, just another, just a technicality if you've never used Microsoft Teams before. I told you a second ago, if you move your cursor over to the right, that your toolbar will go away. If you want to use the chat and you need your toolbar to come back, you should just be able to wiggle your mouse and it should pop back up. And so when it pops back up, then that's where you access the chat feature. So don't freak out if it goes away. You just get it back by wiggling your mouse.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so again, if you've been in a recent PD with us, you may have heard us mention this book before, the Distance Learning Playbook. It came out this summer. I'll be honest, I have a feeling that these authors, Douglas Fisher, Nancy Frey, and John Hattie, probably had already started thinking about this book in the spring, but I have a feeling they got it written and Corwin worked really hard to get it published quickly. So this book just came out in July. They also have a purple book that you can pre-order right now, so it should be out any day, and it's the Distance Learning Playbook for parents. So what we're getting ready to talk about is based on information from this book, and we're really just focused on the very first couple modules or couple chapters, but there's a whole lot of other great information too.
So Jenny, can I interrupt you real quick?
Yes, please.
I put in a PO to order these books for the new teachers. So hopefully that it'll go through and we're able to get them to you before long. Okay.
Oh, good. Because what we're going to talk about today is really just like, how do we start our school year? But the book does go into more detail and further modules about thinking about things like our learning intentions and success criteria, how we engage kids in a virtual environment. So I'm so glad. That's great. So I know several of you are brand new teachers, and some of you have taught in other districts. So you may have already had some experience last spring with distance learning. A couple things to note. If you were teaching last spring, it was a little bit different. That was more of survival mode, let's be honest. We didn't have a lot of time to prepare. And here's the thing about education. We are lifelong learners, and every year we strive to do better than we did the year before. And this year is no different. And so when we approach this year in this different format of virtual, we really do. We want to try and think, okay, how can I make this better than it was last spring? If this is my first year, I want to make sure that I'm doing the best practices, whether it's online or in a face-to-face environment. So with that being said, these first couple slides are just talking about what we do know that does work in a distance learning environment. So the very first thing is fostering student self-regulation. Okay, so what that means is how do we help students become drivers of their own learning? How do we help them take some control? And there's lots of things, and by the way, this is no easy task and it's not going to happen overnight by any means, but there are a lot of little things we can do to promote this as a teacher. So think about how you might give students some choice in their work. Maybe when you think about student voice, like asking for their feedback and their input about things that are working or not working well for them. Think about how you can teach kids to self-assess along the way. That would be ways that you can encourage this student self-regulation. Sorry. We also know that we have to have a diversity of instructional approaches. So again, if you were in the education profession last spring, this may or may not have been the case, because again, we were sort of under, we were under a lot of pressure. We had to do things quickly. So what we want to make sure is it's not just kids pulling assignments off of Google Classroom, that we are using a variety of instructional approaches, just like we would in our regular classroom. And that includes small group, that includes discussion, that includes various collaborative activities. We're going to use different platforms, different tools. So we want to make sure that we are thinking outside the box and also cutting ourselves some slack, because, we're not going to be experts on everything, and it's okay for us to make mistakes just like it is for our students. We need peer learning, meaning we need students to be able to work together. It's going to be critical for our kids to have that relationship with us, the teacher, but it's also going to be really important for them to start forming those relationships with each other, because we do want them to collaborate together. So we got to think about that. How can we do this in a virtual setting? How can we provide opportunity for that? And we're going to talk a little bit about some specific examples throughout that today. And then the last thing that we want to make sure that we have in our distance learning is feedback. So again, we may have done an okay job with this in the spring, but I always think that we can improve our feedback so that it is effective. We want to make sure that it's timely, user-friendly, actionable. And again, in this distance learning environment, we're going to have to think about it slightly different. So your feedback might come in the form of just comments that you add to a Google Doc or Google Slides. It could be an email form to some students, older students. You can also make like a video where you're giving feedback in a verbal way that you share with a small group of students who all have the same needs. One thing we do want to state is that the purpose of the task determines the tool, not the other way around. So what is meant by this statement? Sometimes we get stuck. Sometimes we end up letting a program or a textbook drive our instruction. We end up sort of following something that has been purchased for our school. And what we have to be careful of in this new year is that we also don't want to let all of these great new snazzy, many of them free technology tools drive our instruction. So there's a lot out there, like lots and lots, and it's so great. And so many companies are putting things out, and they're making things that did cost money free. We could go down the list: Quizlet and Kahoot and PlayPosit and Floop and Flipgrid and of course Google Classroom and Slides and Docs. And there's lots and lots more. What I want to be careful of is don't get overwhelmed by all of these. You're not going to be an expert in all of them. No one expects you to. If anything, you almost want to start with just a couple of them. And maybe even like within your department, your team, your grade level team, or your school. Like choose which ones you guys are going to use so that it's easier too for students and parents. But what you want to be careful of is not to let that drive your instruction, meaning, oh, well, the way Flipgrid works is, so, okay, what content could I do using Flipgrid? Instead, it should be, okay, I'm trying to teach this standard and this content. Now, what tool might help me get that across to students, okay? And the quote on this slide is reiterating that point that I just made. We definitely live in a world where technology is relevant. It's important. We just want to be careful and make sure that we focus on the learning and then think of technology as that tool to help us and not the other way around. Okay, so we got to our first chat. In the chat, please, please, please I want you to add your comments here. I want you to think of two things, okay? First of all, just from this very quick introduction, sorry about that, what connections might you make between teaching and learning in our physical classroom and in a virtual classroom? And again, I know you're coming from different contexts with different levels of experience. And then also think about, what do you think students are going to need to know to be able to function well in both mediums? Remember, like Jennifer said, hopefully we're going to be back with our kids at some point. We may go back to virtual. There could be a lot of different settings this year.
Hey, Jenny, we've got students need to know that they are still accountable for their learning. Teachers need to establish relationships.
Absolutely. So we got to hold kids accountable. We got to have relationships for sure.
Students are going to need to know time management. They're going to have to know when to log on and where to be without bells ringing.
Yes.
And Melissa says, regardless of the setting, students need to come first.
Absolutely. And when you think about that time management piece, to me, that's part of that self-regulation piece. So we got to teach kids, how do you manage your time? Where do you find the schedule? You know, when you have something that's not due for 2 days, when should you work on it? I mean, yeah, I think for sure we have to teach kids to do that.
Both virtual and in-person instruction require engaging lessons and standard-based content, and students need knowledge of technology. It's important to consider how well they can connect and use the technology. Students will need to know how to take ownership of their learning. In order for this to work, teachers must be there to support student needs. This goes for both in-person and virtual. How to make a lesson engaging through a virtual medium. And Elizabeth says, as teachers, we need to still have high expectations, and we need to make sure the students know those expectations.
Absolutely. And everything you guys are putting in the chat is definitely true. I'm hoping one of your takeaways is that the connection is what we would consider evidence-based practices, what we would consider, you know, what's good for our students, good teaching and learning in our physical classroom really is going to be the same in that virtual classroom. So we want to be able to do it in both places. And then things they need in both, you guys have already started to mention, like high expectations, certain structures. We're going to have to make sure they know how to use the technology and things like that.
Molly says students need to be able to create a space where they can get their work done with limited distractions. When working virtually, you still need to build those connections with students. Students need connections big time right now with everything going on.
Yes, and several of you mentioned that relationship and that connection piece, which is so, so important. And we're going to talk about that. Okay, read through the chat.
One more thing, Jenny, one more thing. With focus on students in both person and virtual, the squeaky wheel gets the grease more than the quiet kids doing what they're supposed to do. They often get overlooked and ignored. They need recognition.
Oh, that's a good one. Absolutely. And actually, we're going to talk about how we might monitor our interactions with kids, especially some of those quiet ones. Okay, wonderful. You can add to the chat at any time, okay? We're going to go ahead and move forward. So the very first section of this book talks about taking care of yourself. And I always admit that when I was reading this book, I almost skipped this chapter because I was in a hurry. I was in a hurry to get to some of the other stuff, but I'm so glad that I didn't, because I do think everything in this section is so true. And I think as an educator, I'm still working on this. I'm still working to find ways to take care of myself. And sometimes I'm not so great at it in this virtual environment. So with that being said, I love this idea. I think that you could do this with students online. This would be a great sort of get to know you activity in that first week of school. I think we need to do this for each other sometimes. You know, we're in a place where we all have different contexts. We all have sort of different beliefs sometimes around all of this, but what is the same is we're sort of all in the same boat. We're in a distance learning environment right now. We're starting out the school year. We all care about kids, and we just want to make sure that we have empathy for one another, and that we're kind and supportive. So anybody want to add to the chat real quick? Something nice that somebody's done for you this week. Something kind. Let's send out some good positive vibes.
Jenny, while we're waiting for someone to answer that, there are a couple of other comments. Natalie says that their daily attendance is a "how are you feeling today" poll. So that's kind of an emotional check-in. And then Bo says students need to have a virtual voice as loud as they had in their in-person classroom.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, see,
Some now.
I see some of these on my phone. People saying hi, inviting you to lunch.
Soap for their kindergarten classrooms.
I love that. Spread kindness, not germs. That's pretty cute. Buying lunch for someone.
Sometimes just a friendly face is all we need.
That's right. I know Jewett said earlier, oh, patience and acceptance. So, something with this sort of activity or this emotional check-in idea is it sort of makes you realize that it's those little things that can go a long way. And like I said, I think it's a good reminder for us to be kind to one another and supportive. And I think that this is a great thing that you could do with kids too, at any age. Okay, I'm going to keep moving along. So when we talk about taking care of ourselves, we're going to look at the pamphlet in the back of the seat when we're flying. And this is so true. As teachers, we often can work ourselves to death. Let's be honest. We will do anything and everything for our students. That's why we got into this profession. And it's so, so important. And we do that for our families and we do that for everyone. But we do have to remember to stop and take care of ourselves so that we can be the best teacher possible, the best parent, the best friend, whatever that might be. We do have to take care of ourselves. Otherwise, we tend to burn out. And the truth is, in education, you're going to have days where the balance is way off, and that's okay. Sometimes, we're putting a lot more into work than our home life, and then other days it's the opposite. But the key is to make sure that we do tend to ourselves. So ways we can do that. We need to just sometimes acknowledge that things are difficult. Doesn't mean getting all down in the dumps, right? Or too, negative, letting it go take you down the wrong path there. But it does mean we do have to acknowledge that we definitely are faced with some new challenges in education. We want to make sure we maintain those human connections. So whether you're isolated a whole lot or not a lot, obviously making sure that we're talking to one another is important. And then invest in your own well-being. So like I mentioned before, this work-life balance is really important. I know I strive for it all the time, and sometimes I feel like I do a pretty good job and other times not so much, and that's okay. But we do want to keep that in mind. Somebody actually mentioned this in the chat. So keeping a dedicated workspace. So for you as the teacher, if you are going into school, which I think most of you are, on a daily basis, it's a little bit different than obviously finding a workspace within your home. But you may have to do that at some point. If you're in the classroom, make sure that you think about this setup for when you're going to have your live interactions with kids. The lighting, of course, Think about what you need near you while you're doing that, whether that be certain manipulatives, a book that you want to show. And then same thing too when you're recording a video. So you just want to think about that space and making sure that you have everything you need. Create morning routines. Again, if this is not your first year of teaching, you may very well have previously had to come in and have bus duty or car rider duty. And if it is your first year teaching, get ready. You'll have to do that at some point, trust me. Or you're running down the hall and you're trying to get to the copy room so you can make some copies and things like that. I truly believe in my heart of hearts that this virtual learning environment we have found ourselves in is really going to present us with some opportunities that we didn't have before. And I think it would be a shame for us not to take advantage of those and not to carry some of that even back when we do get to be face to face with our kids. So really try to see what those are. One is a very small thing like this. Maybe you do have 5 extra minutes in the morning that you didn't have before. How are you going to use it to set up for a positive day? So if you're into meditation, if you need to take a stretch, if you need to walk down the hall and have a cup of coffee with your neighbor before you start the day. But think about your morning routines. Schedule yourself breaks. Again, in a normal school day, there's not a lot of time for breaks. You know, your planning is really the only time that you're not with children and lunch. So in this environment, if it's possible, schedule yourself a 10-minute break. If it works out that you're not live with students at 10 o'clock from 10 o'clock to 10:10 every day, you know, schedule yourself a break, get up, walk around, do something that is not work related for 10 minutes. I need to work on this one. I say it every day and I still don't think I've gotten very good at it, but I want to work on this one because I do know that when I do take a break for just a minute and I get up and I do something else, I come back so much more refreshed and so much more ready. This slide, again, kind of goes with people that are working from home. I know I've had to do this. You know, we've got sometimes we're not the only person in our house. So we have to let people know, hey, I'm presenting right now, so don't interrupt, or, you know, unless it's an emergency, things like that. So at school, if you're in your classroom, you might want to consider putting something on your door, a sign, just letting people know, hey, I'm in a live session with students right now, or I'm videotaping a lesson right now that I'm going to be sending to teachers. Just something so that they know not to interrupt. It's definitely a different environment. And then, of course, when we talk about routines, you know, routines are important for kids. They're important for us too. Think about how you start your day and think about how you end your day. And if you're a parent, you know, think about that for your own kids too, because a lot of this is going to apply to them also. That's the one thing with the virtual environment. Your workday can blend very easily into your at-home life. And of course, just because we have to be 6 feet apart, just because we have to wear a mask or try to maintain that physical distance does not mean we should, you know, not have that emotional closeness. So make sure that you are making time to socialize. Get to know the people in your building. Be intentional about it. Maybe it's that you do take 10 minutes each day to walk down the hall and meet a different teacher. Because we don't want you to isolate yourselves. And now more than ever, teacher collaboration is going to be really important, and being there for one another emotionally. So be intentional about this. Okay, so that's take care of yourself. Let's talk about the first days of school. And Miss Title Jones already mentioned Harry Wong's book, The First Day of School, and I absolutely love this slide. When I started teaching almost 20 years ago, I was given this book, and I'm glad to say it still has very valid information in it, right? We know how important it is to have solid classroom management with very specific expectations, procedures, structures, so that kids really can master and learn the content. So what also I want you to do is focus on what you do know. And again, this is a new teacher program. So we have different contexts, different amounts of experience, but bring what you do know to the table. You guys have already mentioned several things. You know, if we know we need positive relationships, bring that to the table. We know we need certain expectations and routines in place. We know that we need to know our content and that our teaching begins with our standards. So focus on that and not so much on all of this stuff that we don't know right now, because it feels like there's a lot. So don't worry so much if you haven't heard of FLOOP yet. It's okay. You may or may not need it. You can learn it later. I'm sure we're going to learn a lot from each other, but think about what's really important in teaching and learning. If anything, I feel like this distance learning setting has helped us to slow down a little bit and focus on what we do know is important with our students. As teachers, we are planners. So we want to be proactive. And that does mean really trying to anticipate all of the things that are going to happen, things that we don't want to happen, things we do want to happen, and setting up our virtual environments to encourage those things or discourage. So we definitely have to plan ahead and think about all of those things. I'm going to skip this slide. This one is about your educational philosophy. And I don't know if they still do that in school. A long time ago, before you graduated, you had to write about your philosophy of teaching. And it really just focuses on, like, what are your core beliefs about teaching and learning? If you haven't taken the time to do that, I do encourage it at some point. And then to also kind of think about the fact that my core beliefs really haven't changed just because I'm in a virtual environment. Okay. So this section, the first days of school, we know how important it is to set up expectations for our kids. We have to establish certain norms. If we do not do that, they're going to develop. There will be norms, there will be procedures and things that will naturally occur. The question is, are they going to be ones that we want it to happen? Okay, so we want to make sure that we're the one driving that bus, if you will. So we have to think about that. What are going to be your norms for your class?
Hey, Jenny.
Yes.
According to the chat, they still have to write their philosophy of education.
Oh, they do? See, I'm glad. I'm glad. I used to actually include that on my resume way back in the day. Probably because I didn't know what else to put on my resume back in the day. I'm glad. I'm glad that they still practice that because I do think it's really good. Okay, so norms. So whether you're thinking of norms, expectations, rules and procedures, and all of these kind of mean the same thing and they kind of don't. They're all a little bit different. But right now I want you to think about that. And I want you to think about what would be some of your expectations for class. We're going to put this in the chat again, okay? What would be expectations you have in your classroom if you were going to have your students in front of you face-to-face, physical classroom? Okay, start there. Let's put some of these in the chat. I'm going to stop presenting so I can see, and I'm going to add to the chat myself. Be prepared. Definitely.
Okay, so since we can all see these, I won't read them all out.
Okay. Listener, respectful, kind. I like that. Active listener. Being kind. And so like some of those emotional check-ins would be good for something like that for sure. Ooh, always ask questions. I love that one. Engaged. And the be present and have materials ready. Like think about what that word present means. And you would want to talk about that with kids. It doesn't just mean showing up, but how, when we are in a situation like this, for example, being present means I am an active listener. I'm focused on the conversation. I'm not distracted by my cell phone, things like that. Hands to yourself. Do it. That's true. Some of us do need to have that expectation of hands to yourself. Okay, so.
Thankfully, that's one you won't have to worry about virtually for right now.
That's right, unless they're brother or sister in the room. So thinking about this list, okay, and your school may have some very specific expectations school-wide that they expect everyone to follow. But again, you may have particular ones for your classroom. Think about now, should these stay the same for the virtual environment? And would you add any? So what would you add that might be different in a virtual environment? Yes, mute yourself when it's not your turn to talk. Perfect. Charge your iPad. That's a good one. I haven't heard anyone talk about making sure your device is charged. Yes, we want them to be present for those live sessions, right? So we have to think about our designated workspace. We're also going to encourage kids to do the same. So finding that quiet place to work. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen again. Fortunately, I do have some ideas to share with you on this. And it's like anything else, you know, we do want you to plan ahead and try to anticipate. So you're going to go in already armed with some of these procedures and expectations you want for kids. You know, with younger kids, you may be just teaching them what each icon means, like the pictures, right? And things like that. But I would say also, once you really get into this environment, you're going to realize some things and you may have to add or change as you go. Okay, let me share my screen again. Give me 1 second.
Jenny, not sure if you saw it, but in the chat, who was that said this? Oh, I can't scroll back up until. It was Molly said, be fully clothed during live meetings.
That's so true for both students and teachers. Let's make sure. And that is one thing to think about too. I mean, with older kids and younger kids for that matter, but this is going to be a difficult thing, I think, to show kids and help kids understand. You're at home, yes. So this is your comfortable environment, but being home, you're also at school. So we are going to have to talk to them about their language, about the way they're dressed, things like that, even though it's a virtual environment.
I do think, Jenny, it's valid though, and you may have been getting ready to say this a little later, but since it came up now talking about the expectations for having your camera on, one of the things that Jenny has shared with our group that she learned going through this training was that while some kids may not feel comfortable having their camera on at their home because of whatever the background is or whatever the case may be, to at least encourage them and teach them how to put their picture up so that you can still see their face. and you're not just looking at a circle with their initials in it or whatever. So I thought that was really good advice too, because let's face it, there are some times when we don't want to be seen on camera. So if we can teach them how to put that picture there, but still have the expectation that they're present, even if you can't see them, so that if you were to speak their name, they could still respond or whatever. I thought that was a really good point.
No, absolutely. And yes, like when we started, having a lot of online meetings and virtual things, like, my thought was I want everybody to have their camera on. It's so much better and easier to interact and engage. But yes, you forget that some students might be embarrassed of their home environment or things like that. And so we do need to try and be understanding of that. While we might encourage them to find a spot where they can put their camera on, again, just trying to be understanding of everybody's context. Okay, so in education, if you have not figured this out yet, you soon will. There's lots and lots of acronyms. It's okay if you don't know what they mean. You need to ask for sure. And there's always, I feel like, some new buzzwords, okay? And so I really feel like this year you will hear these terms, synchronous and asynchronous. So let's just make sure we understand. Synchronous is when you are with your kids in those live sessions, okay? So you and your kids are both on camera, you're both in the session at the exact same time. Asynchronous would be anything that they do when they're not with you in that session, okay? So as you're planning this year, you're gonna have to, it's like that added layer. As you're planning, you need to think about, should this be something that is synchronous? I want to make sure we do it in our live session. Or should this be something that they can do without me? And I do think my thinking has evolved on this, and I'm sure that your all's will too as you go. In a regular face-to-face classroom, we would use some of our instructional time to model, right? Or to teach new material. In this environment, because perhaps that live time with kids is going to be limited, we may choose to use that time for discussion or for some coaching or even some small groups at times, because I do think we might be able to make some videos where we do model, or we might find videos that are already made that explain new content. And I think that's kind of cool, because then at least students have the option to rewind, right? They can watch it more than once, things like that. So things to consider as we start our school year. So we were just talking about classroom norms and expectations. I wanted to define those terms because I do want you to think about, what are your expectations for synchronous learning or your virtual sessions with students, okay? So a couple things, and you've already mentioned these. Get them in the habit, like making sure they have completed that pre-class preparation, coming prepared, right? So if there is a video you need them to watch before the live session, because you're going to spend that time discussing, you want to make sure they know to watch that. So whether you put it in your Google Stream in bold capital letters or something, make sure you watch blah, blah, blah before our meeting on Wednesday, things like that. Whether it's in the schedule, however you choose, but making sure kids know what to do before the meeting. The learning intentions. If you were with us yesterday, we talked about this a whole lot. So think about how we're sharing those with kids before those live sessions. Some of you mentioned the quiet space to work. If they are on camera, tell them to think about what's behind them, right? There are ways to do virtual backdrops and things, but you don't want something, you want to let them know that whatever's behind them can also be seen on camera. So to be aware of that. Lighting, things like even naming themselves. For little kids, making sure they understand, I want your first and last name. For older kids, making sure they know, I need your actual name, right? Not some crazy thing you decided to name yourself for the day. When you're in class, so when you're actually in these sessions, getting them to ask questions, right? talk about your learning intentions and success criteria. Making sure they're listening. You know, the questions that they start putting in the chat or making comments at first may not be great questions. So let's teach them. Let's give them some talking stems. Teach them how to ask some good questions. Encourage them. Depending on what platform you're using, and I think you guys are using Google Meet for the most part, and I can't say this for 100% if they have this feature, but hopefully they'll add it if they don't. Some platforms do have like little emojis and things, reaction buttons, if you will. So like, you know, showing praise for each other with hand claps and little smiley faces, things like that. You guys know about muting, and we definitely want to teach that to our kids. Our older kids, not getting distracted with other devices, other tabs open on your computer. Of course, ultimately, you know, we're not able to control that at a distance, but we are able to set those expectations. And if we think that somebody is distracted, you know, to kind of point that out and just sort of bring them back to the conversation. At the end, just like in a physical classroom, this was one of my things that I felt like I was always working on. You need to make sure that you stop in time to have closure. Make sure that you stop and think about, at the close of this session, I want to go back over what my learning intentions were. I want to give kids time to self-assess and see if they actually achieved them. I want to ask some questions, get them to ask some questions. I also want to make sure they know what's coming up next. So what's next on their agenda? When's our next live session? What assignment should they be working on next? The other thing, you know, you've heard me mention like socialization and things like that. You may also, especially at the beginning, for sure, you're going to have to set aside some time maybe for some of that socialization to occur. So carving out the 5 minutes so that you can do some get to know you activities, some fun things, things like that, because they're not going to be able to talk to their friends like they normally would. This was one of our success criteria. So being able to evaluate your learning management system from the perspective of a family member or a student. You could tweak this, of course, ask yourself other questions, but do think about a couple things. If you were a student getting on, would you know where to find your schedule? Okay. Whether that's daily, weekly, whatever. Do they know how to find their assignments and any materials they need? Would they be able to submit and turn in work? Do they know how to retrieve that graded work so they can see how they've done? Do they know how to contact you for help? And then what if they do need technical help? Somebody mentioned this in one of the comments too. Whether it be getting online or using their device, we want to make sure that they know how to do that. Okay, so who would they contact? And the teacher may very well be the first point of contact. But things to think about. So we want to evaluate, you know, what parents and students are looking at on Google Classroom and try to be flexible, make changes as needed so that we can always try to improve that.
Jenny, can I interject there?
Please, please.
Can you go back to that slide?
Yes.
When you guys look at those, I want you to think about, okay, do we just tell the kids this is where it is and this is where you find it? Or a great way and a way to make it permanent, and it's natural, it's efficient, it's effective, is by practice, practice, practice. Whether it is write your name on a piece of paper, submit, you know, type it, submit it to me, and let me check it. I'll give a comment back and get it back to you, just so they can, you know, do this maybe at the beginning a couple times till they really see this is where this goes. This is how this is done. If I have a question, how, you know, practice that with them. It just doesn't, this practice, you know, you do it one time and assume that they know how to do it.
Yeah.
And I love, Jen, oh, I'm sorry, Jenny.
No, you're
I
fine.
love how at the top of this paper, if you see the little fine print, it suggests developing an FAQ. And I think that would be great for parents, even if it doesn't say, how do I submit work? If it says, how does my child submit work? Or How can I retrieve my child's graded work or whatever? That way, if a parent is trying to help and the student can't remember, they have a place to look, especially for younger kids.
Yes,
They
definitely.
may not be able
So
to.
you could develop like a frequently asked question sheet. Another thing you could do is do a screencastify or some sort of video, right, where they're looking at your computer screen and you're talking them through. This is how you would turn in an assignment. When you need to find materials, this is the tab you'll use. Like you could do a short video too, so that they can refer back to it. But like Miss Diddle Jones said, she mentioned the fact that you do have to practice it. So it's one thing to post it. It's one thing to answer these questions on a sheet somewhere. It's another thing to really like implement it and practice it over and over. And I love the test runs. Like have your kids and or parents even email you a comment or a question every, each week, so that they're practicing that, like, how do I contact you kind of thing. Yes, and submitting work. I mean, even in the beginning, like she said, if it's just, I want you to write your name and 3 things you like, It could also be great with your get to know you activities. Have them practice these procedures through that.
Or even how to send a friend or a classmate
Oh,
some
yeah.
communication back and forth, just to get the practice of maneuvering, through the different platforms that these poor babies are on and us, and that was, it's a whole new world.
Yes, yes.
Jenny, we have a comment that says, speaking as a parent who is trying to do this with their own children right now, this is important. I'm clueless.
I absolutely agree completely. And I do feel at an advantage, in the fact that I do know how to navigate Google Classroom and a lot of these things. But I can't imagine how some of our parents might be feeling. And even as an educator, I still feel overwhelmed. Definitely. So these things are really, really important. Okay, so we're to our last module. And we're doing great on time. We're going to be done by 5:30 for sure. So this next section talks about those relationships. And again, several of you mentioned that already. Absolutely, we know this to be true. And I love this. No significant learning occurs without a significant relationship. We have to have these positive relationships with our students. They need to have positive relationships with each other. They need to feel safe. We create a culture where it's okay to ask questions, to take risk. They feel okay, safe talking to someone if they need to talk and things like that. So this is such an important piece. And when all of this started and people started talking about online, and I felt like at the very beginning, people were so focused on the content, and how am I going to teach this, and the programs, and all of that stuff out there. And not that, of course, that's important, but for a little while, and I think it's totally come back, and it makes me so happy. I think some of these things got away from us, and so it's kind of come back to the forefront. We're starting school. How are we going to build these relationships? Okay, when we're not in the same physical space. So a couple things I want you to remember. The first day of school, I mean, I don't know about you all, but it's like Christmas. You almost can't sleep the night before. Teachers are excited, students are excited, parents are excited, and not because they're sending their kids off to school. They're excited for their kids, right? They're excited to meet the teacher for the first time. So just remember that, and remember that those first impressions, your first interactions, even if it's on a computer screen, we want that excitement to come across. So we're smiling, and our voice, our tone, is happy and positive and enthusiastic, and our expressions, our verbal or our body language, right? So just think, how can I make that come across? If you have been teaching, or if you're new to it, we all got into this because, again, deep down, we're passionate. We're passionate about kids, about learning. Sometimes, like for me, I'm super passionate about math, right? We want that to come across to our kids. So don't be afraid to act goofy. You know, if you're teaching elementary school, don't be afraid to like sing or dance on camera, you know, dress up in a lab coat for science class, or a book character when you're doing a read aloud or something. We want that passion to come across, even if it's through a screen. So if kids see us as being passionate, right, that's how these relationships are going to start. They're going to trust us, right? They're going to want to be in our class. We also have to take time to learn about them. Okay, so think about how you figure out and get to know your kids. What are they interested in? There are lots and lots of different get to know you activities that you might do at the beginning of the year. We still want to do those in a virtual environment, okay? Whether it is 2 truths and a lie, or a scavenger hunt, or you send something home to parents and they have to submit an assignment on Google Classroom, which I think would be awesome, where they answer questions about their kids, have the kids interview each other and share with the class. I know one of my kids, I feel like they always do an all about me bag, and they'll bring it in and share. Well, same thing. One of my 3rd grader, I have to pick up his bag tomorrow. And so that first week, I think they're all going to take turns online sharing their all about me bag. So think about how we're going to learn interest of our kids. This slide talks about John Hattie and Zier. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that last name correctly. Mind frames of visible learning. Okay. So I want you to think about these just for a second. We're not going to spend much time on this, but it might be something that you go back to later in the year, actually. But great teachers embody these principles, okay? I want you to think, do I believe this? Do I feel like I already do this well, or this is something that I think could be a strength for me? And is there one, and maybe just start with one that I want to be intentional about, or that I want to try and improve or work on this year? I think there's lots of good ones here. So I just want you to take a moment and kind of read through them. I know for me, I do think different years I would have been working on different things. Engaging in as much dialogue as monologue, I think, is an important one for teachers. Sometimes we get carried away and we do too much of the talking and even too much of the thinking. Collaborating with other teachers, hopefully being new teachers or new to the district. You're going to be reaching out all the time, and you know this is going to be really important this year to do that. Okay, I see assessment as informing my impact and next steps. Like, just think about that for a second. Is that what you believe? And if it's not, let's think about that. Is that something I could work on? Because sometimes people see assessment as it's just a test. It's something I have to give. It's so I can give grades. When in reality, there's much more to it. So just some things to think about. Okay. I've mentioned this a couple times. Relationships, teacher to student, but also peer to peer. Okay. And how we see a child, our relationship with them impacts the relationship they have with peers. So what I mean by that, for example, my daughter is very quick and very like, she can tell me pretty quickly like, oh, he's one of the bad kids in class, right? And she's not coming up with that just completely on her own. She's probably seen some interactions too between the teacher and that child, right? that makes her think that. And in some ways, I think then she might have not a positive view of that student. And we don't want that for any kid, right? We definitely don't want our relationship to impact their relationships with others. So if you haven't yet, you will hear about John Hattie. He's done tons and tons of research. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail, but the basic idea is he looks at all sorts of different things that influence learning. And he's been able to assign it effect sizes. If it's a 0.4, that is a typical year's growth. And so we spend a lot of time and energy looking at influences that are above a 0.4, okay? Because we're always trying to close that gap, and we're trying to help our kids learn as much as possible. There are very few things that can have a negative impact, and one of them is students feeling disliked. So, you know, we don't want that for anyone. So we want to think about how we prevent that from happening. And that could be feeling disliked by their peers or even disliked by a teacher. This is an older study, but I have no doubt that a lot of it still rings very true. We want a kid to feel liked. We want to praise them, have that positive relationship, because the last thing we want is for them to feel like they're not welcome in our classroom, right? And when we treat kids differently, they become low achieving. So just think about that for a second. And a lot of teachers, I mean, you would never ever intend for this to happen, but we have to be, you know, aware of our interactions with kids at all times. So, you know, kids that we don't have that positive relationship with, or that we do see a little bit differently, they get praised less. We don't give them as much feedback. They're not called on as often. And we have fewer friendly interactions with them. So there is a tool, and I'm trying to remember where it's at in the slide deck, that's actually going to help us monitor some of that. And I'll share that with you in just a minute, okay? So, in thinking about a lot of this in relationships, we need to pay attention to some things, okay? How are we going to notice who hasn't participated so that we can re-engage them? So we got to find a way to keep track of that. Even in a physical classroom, it's super easy to just let whoever raises their hand, you know, answer the question, and you've got so many things on your plate, and you're thinking about your lesson and what's next, and you're monitoring the classroom and things like that. But we do also have to pay attention to who's participating, who's not, and how do I re-engage them. We got to think about how to create discussion opportunities, even in a virtual platform. And there's lots of different ways to do that. Breakout rooms, in collaborative documents with Google, you know, Google Docs, Google Slides, and having them like make comments and things. The key is that we have to be present. So we want to make sure that we're popping in and out of those breakout rooms. We want to make sure that we are making comments where we've asked kids to collaborate, or where we've asked them to make comments. We want to add to that so that they see and feel our presence. This is that document I was talking about. So if you do have a kid who is shy or quiet, I've got one of those at home, one of 3. The other 2 are not shy or quiet, so we don't have to worry there. But if you do have a child that's shy, or a child for whatever reason, maybe it is because they're a little bit behind academically, or they're not engaged. It could be a lot of different things going on. But let's think about, how do I ensure that I am reaching some of those kids, okay? And this doesn't mean the kids who aren't showing up, right? The kids who do not show up, that's a whole different thing. But we do need procedures in place for that. So like, I need to contact the parent, obviously, if I can't get in communication with them, or if they don't show up 2 times in a row, like, what do I do next? Talk to leadership, talk to other teachers to see what they do. Is it something that a counselor is going to get involved in, or the Frisk office, or things like that? But this is for the kids that are there. Pick a couple, okay? Don't try to do your whole class at once. You have a whole lot on your plate, so just pick a couple students, And what I love about this is you could do a couple students for this lesson. I could do this a couple students this whole week if I want. I can change who I'm trying to engage, who I'm monitoring. But I love this idea, and you just put tally marks, okay, by those students' names. Again, you can change this so that it meets your needs, add to, take away any of these items. But did I greet the student by name that day? Like as soon as they came into the virtual classroom, did I make sure that I greeted that particular student by name? Put a tally mark every single time you use their name. Did you ask them specifically a critical thinking question? Did you ask them a personal question? Give them a compliment? How many times did you give them praise? Because again, these are students that we want to engage, that we want to make sure are participating. So we got to give them that little bit of extra to make sure that happens. And it's just a way to kind of hold ourselves accountable. We know school is social, so it's not just about academics. It's about much, much more for our students, right? And so we want to think about like, how can we do this for our kids, even though they're at home and I'm in a different place? How can we create this for our kids? Because we don't know for sure how long we'll be in this environment. Hopefully it won't be too long, but you know, we don't know if we'll end up back in this environment at some point. So we got to keep all this going. So I love this idea of thinking about increasing virtual touch points, okay? All this simply means is any contact I have with a kid, okay? And it's going to look a lot of different ways in distance learning. Some can take more effort than others, but I really want you to think, how do I increase all of these contacts? So it can't just always be the same way. I know in the spring, I so appreciated that my kids' teachers would send me remind texts each day, but it also got to a point where it's like, oh my gosh, another remind text. So we want to do it in a variety of ways. So here are some ideas. Ask an intriguing question in advance of instruction. So like a way to prime their thinking or launch an activity, okay? And you can send that through text. You could put it on Google Classroom, email, lots of different ways, right? Post photos. You have to get permission, okay? And your school will have those forms, but get permission to take pictures of kids and videos of kids. We do that every school year. And then encourage them to take pictures and send you pictures of them doing their classwork, okay? Not just like a random picture, but like of them working on an assignment or a project, because it's going to be so great for them to be able to see each other doing that work at home. So they know it's not just them. And we can share this either in our live sessions, we could post them someplace, but I do love that idea. And you can share photos of yourself too with your kids. Customized directions. So I would never suggest that you do this for every assignment, of course, but occasionally, especially if the directions are a little bit more lengthy. Think about how you might just real quick videotape yourself giving these directions, because what that does is it allows you to have contact with your student in the way that they can hear your voice and see your face. So if we just type the directions and they're reading it from a screen, it's just not the same thing. So if we really want to increase those contacts we have, think about how you might send a video, or even in that next one you can see, you can provide comments, using Google Voice. So you can type a comment, but you can also make it where they can listen to the comment so they can hear your voice. Same thing with feedback. You could also record a short video. Postcards. A lot of schools send things like postcards home, positive praise. That shouldn't stop just because we're in a distance learning environment. So you can send things in the mail. You know, we celebrate birthdays a lot, especially in the younger grades. Even in the older grades, send a virtual birthday card to your kids. So like find out their birthdays and, you know, send those virtual birthday cards and things to them. So just ways to increase those virtual touch points. Here's the example of the question that you could send ahead of time. And all it is it's just one more way that they've had contact with you, just a quick hey, I'm here as your teacher. We're going to talk about this on Thursday, so bring your ideas, right? Here's the example of a picture. A PE teacher last spring asked their kindergartners, first graders to build pillow forts. He asked the parents to take pictures and send them in, and then he shared those with the class. All right, we're at our last chat. So let's be very specific with this one. Think of specific things that you're going to do, that you're going to try to do, starting from the beginning of the year. How are you going to build relationships? What will you do to make sure that you stay connected to students and families?
Jenny, I was just getting ready to ask you to start presenting so you could see the chat.
I was frozen for a second, I think. Making it personal. And yes, that all, like, just like in the classroom, my face keeps freezing. I'm watching my camera now. Sorry. Just like in the classroom, it's so easy to, again, if we're not intentional, some of our kids get way more attention than other kids from us. We want to make sure everybody is having those contacts.
Oh, love the personalized videos.
Mm-hmm. And they could use Flipgrid. If some of them want to record on their phone and send you things, I mean, you probably have to put like a time limit on it. We wouldn't want it to get out of hand. Some kids can talk for a long time about themselves on video. I mean, Naomi, it sounds like a simple thing, but I mean, use their name, right? Say their name when you're talking to them. Learn their name. You know, if they go by a different name or a nickname, make sure we find out what that is. Pronounce their name correctly. It seems like obvious things, but we want to make sure that we're doing that for sure. Show and tell. Say goodbye separately. Oh, like a virtual fist bump. Isn't that cute? Class Dojo, that's one that some people use. There was something I was going to make a comment. Oh, like the show and tell. I don't know if it was show and tell. What was it? Almost like people that showed up for the live session could get rewarded in some way, and like not rewarded, but like, you know, maybe you say, oh, you know, you were all here today, you know, next week you're gonna get 5 minutes to share. I don't know, maybe that's a bad example, but I am trying to think about how we can reward some kids. Somebody mentioned like a lunch bunch. So, you know, and not every day, please remember what I said about taking care of yourself. But once a week, like you might actually like be online and offer to have lunch with some kids, that kind of thing. So it could just be a social interaction. Music video. You guys should totally make some music videos for your kids. That would be awesome.
To make them on TikTok, that'd be even better.
Okay, we are at the end. So Jennifer mentioned a reflection sheet. I'm going to share my screen one more time. Jewett, I'm going to let you talk about it, and then Jen, I'll let you reiterate when they need to do it by and where they need to turn it in. Okay, Jewett.
Are you getting feedback when I talk?
Yes.
No.
I don't think it's as bad now as it was, but it was bad a minute ago. Okay, so this is called a triangle, square, circle reflection, and each of the shapes helps you understand what you need to do for that part of the reflection. So for the triangle, we're going to ask you to think of 3 things that stuck with you about today's learning, just big ahas, takeaways, things that for whatever reason you really connected with or gravitated to. So that would be your 3 points that will stick with you, just like a triangle has 3 points. For the square, thinking about, we're getting ready to start our school year virtually. That's because kind of our whole purpose today was to think about how that could be successful. So something that you must have squarely in place in order for your school year to be successful. And then the circle is just what's still rolling around in your head. What questions do you still have? What are you still wondering about? What are some next steps you may like for follow-up support or next steps that you're going to take on your own to further your professional learning? And Jen, this document, they have this in their Google Drive, right?
They do.
Like
I
your
assigned it to
classroom.
them. Yes, I assigned it to them. So they can type on that or they can print it however they want to have that as a resource to them. But also if they need to, I guess I would say type on it because I will be looking at them probably by Friday when they all have them submitted, Thursday evening or Friday morning.
And I apologize that your Google Doc does not look as pretty as that slide. It was a real pain to put those shapes on that Google Doc where it would still allow you to type on it. So I did the best I could. I think you'll still remember what it looked like, though.
And also the plus delta, if you can do that now before you disconnect. But before we go any further, are there any questions or concerns or anything you would like to share? And if not, I would go ahead with your plus delta. If you can't find it, please let me know and I'll send you one through an email if that would be easier for you.
Can you hear me?
Who's
Yes.
that? Yes.
This is Olivia Clemens. Sorry.
Hi, Olivia.
I cannot find the plus delta.
Okay, Olivia, I'll make a note and I will email it to you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Not a problem, sweetie.
Can you add me to that email, Savannah Moss? I found it on Google Classroom, but it will not let me open in Google Drive in order to be able to type into it.
Okay.
Or
Can you add me
Google-
that email as well? It's Bowman if
Yeah.
you can't find it.
I had the same problem.
How about if I just send it back out to the whole group when I get off, and then if you want it, that may be the easiest way.
Definitely sounded like that might be easiest.
And if you got it, discard it. You don't need it. But if you all can get me the plus delta this evening or, within a half an hour, that would be just great. Okay.
Okay. So she'll email you. And they were quiet today, but I bet by the end of the year, they won't be quiet anymore.
Hopefully by the end of the year, we'll be able to be face-to-face and not online.
Yeah. Well, everyone, thank you so much. And I hope your week, I know it's only Tuesday and it probably feels like it's been a month long already, the first 2 days. And you guys have been busy and hard at work, and we appreciate that. And our kids in Newport are so thankful that you're here to work with them and support them. And what a blessing you really are. So thank you. And please send me those plus deltas and get your reflections to me by Thursday evening or Friday morning. Okay. And I'll keep you up to date on our next session, which is September the 21st, which is a Monday. Okay, everybody have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.